It can be devastating. What are some main points? Adults need to be supportive and accepting regarding their technology use. They absolutely have to be. And we have to maintain open communication to help youth. And that's even when we hear stuff that we don't want to hear. And the relationship issues have to be addressed. These are about relationships. And adults have to become a safe haven and a resource for problem solving. And we have to recognize that we're not always. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mishna. We'd like to now open it up to questions. We have microphones on either side of the aisleway, so if you'd like to ask a question, please step to the aisle.
Good afternoon, Dr. Mishna. Thank you for a wonderful talk. One of the things that I'm finding interesting about this discussion is you mentioned isolation, you mentioned anonymity, but one thing I don't hear is privacy. Having taught digital natives as a digital immigrant now for about 10 years in psychology and sociology, one of the things I'm discovering is when I teach concepts such as exhibitionism and voyeurism, students treat them as normal. And when I teach about the concept of dramaturgy or impression management, the concept of privacy is foreign, as if you somehow have the right to privacy. In a digital age, this seems to be a foreign concept. And at the level of primary prevention, I'm wondering how much nurturing a notion of personal privacy and personal boundary might be a part of helping to facilitate this, not in a way that makes children responsible for their own bullying in a way that sets up for blaming a victim, but how promoting personal privacy might be an important part of helping to combat some of these concerns.
I think that's a great question. I think it's I don't know if there's anybody else here who feels they can answer that too. I think that's something that it's sort of like, I feel like it's a moving target, because when we talk about privacy, in order to, the question is, what do people think is privacy now? And I think the whole definition of privacy is changing the space, and we need to take that into account. In the research we've done on cyber technology affecting traditional therapy, it's come up in a similar way where practitioners were talking about the boundaries being expanded and it being problematic. And then when we ask younger practitioners, they don't necessarily have that same reaction. So I think it's something we need to figure out, like what, because if we say, oh, this is your right and you should have this, we need to know what people think they should have. So I think it's a really important area, but I think we don't yet at this point know how to address that. So we really need to find out the differences.
You touched upon parents educating children young, but I was just wondering, in terms of raising awareness about cyberbullying for older children and youth, is there any data about whether adults or peers are more effective facilitators in that?
Well, we know generally that I think they're great. I think it's really important to use peers. I think peers are great to be involved in teaching both adults and peers. So I think they should be involved for both, actually. And I think research does show that kids really respond great to peers, and I think adults would too. So I would say yes.
Is it okay if I ask two questions?
Oh, hi, sorry.
That's okay. I know we're bouncing back and forth. Is it okay if I ask two questions?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't remember the second one. You'll remind me.
The first question I have is that you mentioned sexual assault, online sexual assault, and I was wondering if there's an actual definition for what behaviors that include besides just sending pictures.
Besides?
Besides just sending pictures, is there any kind of behavior that also is included in that definition?
Well, I didn't include that here, but I think there's a whole, I think that's a whole other area of
Okay.
sexual assault, because sexual assault online is often sexual abuse that's happening at the moment. And we try to stay away from that in here because that is such a huge area and so serious. So I don't know if you come after, I might be able to give you some names of people who are doing work on that where you could get
Okay.
definitions.
Okay. And then my second question is that you mentioned that parents saying to their children, just delete it, ignore it, or if you ignore it, the behavior will go away. I realize that that might be not, like the parent saying it might not be effective, but do you actually think the behavior of ignoring it does make bullying go away or teasing go away?
Generally, research shows it doesn't.
It doesn't, okay.
It doesn't. I mean, in some cases it might, but generally it doesn't.
Okay, so it's not just the parent saying it, it's
No.
the actual, okay.
Yeah, and I think research has shown that it doesn't. And then even when people try to ignore it, it goes underground inside.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to know of the kids who bully other kids, what factors might take place in the home? For instance, is there domestic violence that is taking place in their home, or is it a wide variation of things that is happening that these kids decide to go online or use technology to bully or antagonize another kid?
I think the reason, there's not one group alone. There's some kids who've grown up in families. There's shown to be an association between families, not necessarily where there's violence, although there might be, but where the discipline ranges from being really lax to punitive.
Okay.
So that, rather than authoritative, but authoritarian, that's
Okay.
problematic.
Okay.
And where kids maybe feel their voices are not heard. But then in other situations, and this is where it's confusing, some research has shown that kids who bully others do have good self-esteem. But I think if there is any family dynamic, it would be that it's authoritarian.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Okay.
Yes, I think my question probably centers more around the technology and the policing.
Yes.
It seems that cyber bullies they seem to be easy to find in the aftermath. Now, are the kids really that easy to find, or are they technologically savvy enough to cover their tracks, or do they even care?
Probably all of it. I think that, I know that in school boards, they have IT people who are really dedicated to trying to cover try to find them, and kids also can cover their tracks. And I think one of the issues about it, and maybe that's why it's called perceived anonymity, is that it is hard to find. It is hard to. But providers, the internet providers can find it, but they might not respond. So I think it is harder to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of my work is with people, adolescents and young adults with disabilities, and I have worked on developing programs for this population of people on cyber safety and risk reduction. I have not found any programs that are specifically for that population. Do you know of any programs? I know Ability Path has a lot of information, but not to teach to young people. It's more for the adults.
So that population with disabilities, you mean?
I'm sorry?
Do you mean for the population?
People with on this autism spectrum disorder, cognitive impairments, learning disabilities.
I don't know of any. I don't know if Gina's. I don't know of any. If you come after, I can try to give you some names of people who might know of some. But I know that every day people are developing new programs. I think it's exploding. But right now, I don't know of any. But I know some people who might know.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to ask you about the cyclical nature of victimization and what kind of concrete steps that you could take to stop that cycle.
Well, I think that's where I think it's really, really critical. Two things. One is for adults, what I talked about, the scaffolding and the social architecture that Deb Pepler and Wendy Craig talk about. that where adults need to intervene physically. So externally, so let's say if a group is bullying one kid, because again, research has shown that if a child changes, the group still might not change so quickly. So to change the groupings around so that you actually break that cycle a bit. And then internally, that's where, and again, not every child needs therapy, but to somehow validate them, make them feel like they have the right not to be treated that way, and also help them, like we often talk about, helping them see what they're doing to cause the problems. Well, the problem with that is you don't want to help somebody have insight into what they might be doing that's problematic until they first feel good. So first, help them feel better about themselves, and then from that perspective, help them learn how to act in a way that makes them less vulnerable. So I think doing the combination of both is really critical.
Okay, thank you.
My question is about drawing the line between bullying behavior and, I guess, just normal childhood conflict.
Yeah.
I think of the situations where, the kindergarten boy gets expelled because he hugged a female classmate and now he's a sexual predator. Just the overreaction.
Exactly.
In my own experience, I have an elementary school age son, and he came home and talked about how a friend bullied him because he didn't want to play with him at recess. And now he has, in his mind, labeled this peer as a bully, where I think, maybe he just didn't want to play with you at recess. And how do we help draw those lines? And are there some definitions of when it's bullying and when it's just being a kid?
I think it's a great question. I think there's a theoretical answer, but I think in practical terms, it's really hard to figure that out in many cases. I think the answer is that if it's more or less mutual, and if there's not an intent to hurt, like if he didn't want to play with him because he didn't want to play with him, but it was really meant to hurt him, and if there's a power imbalance. So that's easy to say. In reality, it's hard to figure out. So I think it's important to keep that in mind and to try to just look for that. Just to look to see if in the dynamic there really is a power imbalance, and if not, because I think it is really hard to determine that. And we don't want to do either, because I agree with you that we don't want everything to be bullying, because conflict is conflict. But if it is that kind of power imbalance, we want to somehow intervene. And again, it can be in a very subtle way. They don't even have to know. So I think that's the thing, to just see if you can, and I know often, like teachers I've spoken to say, like in their classroom, they're trying to teach, and they're figuring out, so is this 50-50? Is it more or less equal? So just trying to be aware of that.
Right, and then my other concern with that is just training our kids, teaching our children to learn how to handle conflict, that
Yes.
not everybody is going to like you and not everybody's
Absolutely.
going to treat you nicely, and that's just part of life.
Absolutely. The conflict is a normal part of life, but bullying doesn't have to be. And also just how to handle conflict and differences and in ways that are not as hurtful. But I agree. I think that's really the challenge. That's why I think a lot of people would agree, it's important to be working on those kinds of things early on, so it's not in the language of bullying, because that hopefully doesn't have to go to there.
Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. It was great.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if your PowerPoint is available.
Yes, Julie and I talked about that. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
On the handout that has the resources, it has my name and email, so if you're interested in the PowerPoint, just send me an email and I'll send it to you.
And what's your name?
Julie Alterkay.
I have to, the PowerPoint that I'll send can't have any of the pictures because those are copyrighted, so it'll be blank, but all the text will be there.
The other, just a statement or perhaps a question too. I provide prevention services, usually in after-school mental health setting. And I've had some students who have been bullied, but I never thought about having the parents in, and I thank you for that. Do you have any tips for doing that with parents?
Well, I think it's how to bring them in. So if the child's the aggressor, it's like with anything, how to engage with them so they don't just feel bad and defensive, and recognizing they might. And so just to really talk to bring them in just, again, I think it's always good to normalize it, not that it's okay, but that it's very common, but that it's important to intervene. So just to find a way to engage them in either way without making it bigger than it is. So for the child who's victimized, without making it overly dramatic, but taking it seriously. And then if it's an aggressor, like I said, how to engage with them without making them feel too bad.
What do you think about just having a presentation for parents in
I think
general?
that's great. I think that's always great.
Yeah.
And then, because it gives them the information, and then any parents who want then or feel it resonates for them could then come and speak. I think that's a really good way to start.
Okay, thank you very much.
Have you found any effectiveness with a victim and a perpetrator having supervised confrontation?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Having supervised confrontation between the victim and the perpetrator?
Yeah, like I think, you mean with schools? I think sometimes like there's restorative justice in some programs, really in schools for bullying, that's been shown to work. So again, if it's done in a way, and often, and sometimes peer-mediated things work. So I think that can work, but again, it needs to happen in a deliberate way, so that, let's say, particularly the child who's victimized has to really be in a position where they know they have the choice, and there needs to be support around for both, I think. So I think that is an option.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, last question.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming to Detroit and speaking with,
Thank you.
with us on this very crucial subject. I'm representing a nonprofit organization that is providing after-school mentoring, tutoring program for children between elementary and high school.
I think those are great
They're
programs.
very up to date on computers, and some of us aren't, you know, those older people like me. But I'm very concerned because they're playing bullying, and they're, you know, the bullies are the bully people, the victims as well. And I'm hoping that Wayne State University will have a program that will address this after this section. And I really appreciate you for coming here, and I'm so grateful for Wayne State University for the work that they've already done.
Thank you.
So
I think
if we can
after-school
have any
programs are
help,
great.
we really need it.
Pardon me?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mishna. There will be a book signing immediately after, right outside, so please be sure to check out Dr. Mishna's book. Also, please fill out your evaluation forms and turn them in at the desk as you leave. For those of you seeking CE credits, your evaluation or your certification forms are available outside at the desk. And finally, please be sure to check out our Continuing Ed website. We will have a spectacular program available again in the spring. Thank you so much for coming today.